All right, let's get started. I thought we'd do a slightly different format of discussion today since I was just at DevCon for the whole week. So I thought I'd do a little bit of a trip report. And the reason I posted this article as today's reading is it's kind of the background of what happened at DevCon. Uh, Clearly, this article was written a few months before the merge actually happened. But now that it's happened and happened actually like completely smoothly and with no issues, we are actually sort of on the cusp of starting this roadmap. But before I do the quick sort of trip report, uh, quick check on your reaction to the article in terms of like just sheer comprehension on a scale from like 0 to 10. I kind of want to level check how much people are even like getting the contours of what's going on based on this article, because this is what's going on. So, can we do a quick round starting with Anuraj? On a scale of 0 to 10, just rank yourself on like whether you're completely like befuddled, which is 0, or 10 means you kind of like are at the bleeding edge of understanding what's going on. So, Anuraj,
I would say either half or one for me.
okay. Ben, please pass it down. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say about 7.5. I know all of this from the high level. I know basically roughly what they're trying to do. I could describe it and I could tell you why. I don't know all the like individual details of exactly how like a vertical tree works or all the details of how they're actually going to set up this. And I disagree with some of I guess the design reasoning. But yeah, I think I have a reasonable handle on what's going on here.
Probably a two. Like I can read and sort of grok it, but not really getting it past the commits.
Yeah, a little out of the loop. But probably like two, 2.5. I think some of the Brian have like a good high level understanding of what's going on here, but that's about it.
In my case, I guess it would be something like 4, so not even a half. And I don't see who the next person is because I'm on phone.
Right, it's almost always me. Hi, it's Jenna.
Hi.
My aspirations for understanding this are pretty minimal. Like, I recognize the terms that were included, and so I give myself a 10 for that. But understanding how any of it actually works, I'm, point for it. So if I can use two scales, that's where I'll be. Kiran, take it away.
Yeah, I think I'm at a 2 or 3. It took me a while to understand the first diagram of the different centricities and the 4 different layers of Ethereum. Passing on to Meredith.
Hi. I read the wrong piece, so I am probably at a 1. I only read a little bit of the correct piece, so very very low understanding at this moment. And then I'm gonna pass it on to Nathan. Is next on my list? Did Nathan go already?
No, I have not gone.
Okay.
I think I would put myself. I think judging from what everybody else has said, I'll say like a 2.5 or a 3. And I think between reading this and some other things, I have the very broad outlines in my head, but I also it's been long enough since I've done any of any sort of mathematics that would be at all applicable to this, that I feel like I kind of need a 3-month graduate level refresher course to really start tracking what's going on. Pass it on to Sachin.
or four, sort of understand the overall design and contours of it, but I don't understand the math or much of the technical details. Sridhar?
I would say the same thing, maybe a 3.
All right. Yeah, that's very helpful calibration. And even though I get the sense that all of us are like rating ourselves on slightly different scales. So like, I don't think Nathan's 3 or 4 is the same as I don't know, Brian's 3 or 4, since we seem to have like different aspirations and how deeply technically we want to understand this. But it does seem like everybody, besides Ben, who's working in the sector directly, nobody has like a confident understanding of what's going on. So I would put myself also at a 3 or 4, and at DevCon, since I got actually to sample how the core people themselves actually view themselves, I would say even the Ethereum core developers. So I met all of them, went to dinner with them, and spent the whole day in their R&D workshop. I would say they themselves are like at most an 8 or 9. Like, so the broader community of like developers contributing isn't like that far behind like even the core people who just pulled off the merge. So this is a very speculative roadmap even for them. And I spent a couple of hours talking to Vitalik as well. And I would say, even though he's kind of a little bit checked out from the core development process these days, he's still the one who has the most comprehensive overall understanding of what the hell is going on. And I would put him at maybe like, I don't know, an 8.5. So I would say nobody in the world is a 10. So that's just kind of calibration of what the state of the art is. So what I thought I'd do is I'll give a quick sort of trip report. Did anybody else here go to DevCon besides me, or has been to a DevCon? Okay, yeah, it looks like not. So I'll do a little trip report, and then the question I think that would be interesting to discuss is we spent several months starting this time last year, right? When we first started exploring blockchain stuff, I think November or so. And then we did all that hands-on stuff through January, February, March, I think. So I think it may actually be a good time to restart a cycle of doing another round of maybe not 100%, but like 50% of this track, diving into bits and pieces of what's happening with blockchain. Because I think post-merge, suddenly a lot of things that were like extremely speculative and nobody knew if we would even get there and it would be interesting to go in or not. They're suddenly very real things now that people are starting to actually work on. So I think it's time for another, I don't know, 50% bandwidth exploration. Okay, so let's see. I made a couple of short notes. All right, so DevCon, it's a huge event. I didn't realize it was this huge. So when Vitalik did his keynote, the entire big hall was full, and that was about 3,000 plus people with overflow. And there were a huge number of side events going on, both organized by the Ethereum Foundation and other organizations, including competing organizations. So I was told that in previous DevCons in like more developed country areas, like the DevCon Japan, competitors like Solana or Avalanche would actually set up shop right across the street at a different venue and try to like attract Ethereum developers to their ecosystems. This time, because it was in Bogota, which is harder to get to, there wasn't as much, but there was still some activity, and I'm pretty sure there were probably like people doing competitive research. So after the merge, I think Ethereum has become the sort of bleeding edge blockchain to beat, at least technically. Who knows about the economy, but technically, I think the narrative has really shifted. Like there's still people insisting Bitcoin is kind of the OG blockchain where things are happening, but I kind of got the validation of my sense that has been developing for the last year that Bitcoin has kind of like not just technically, deliberately and self-consciously chosen to ossify, but culturally has definitely ossified. Like it's become like an old religion or something. So there's a metaphor I've heard a few times was Bitcoin is Old Testament and Ethereum is New Testament or something like that. So that was the sort of overall vibe of the event. The side events, yeah, it was like I don't know, huge number of startups and investor firms and little organizations constantly running little side events and like handing out free dinner passes and stuff. So there's a huge amount of like both money and energy there. Okay, all right, the actual content of the whole event, I would say it was like extremely highly technical and sincere and really good quality. Like I've been to like lots of both academic and industrial sort of technology conferences, and this was way up there. Like I was surprised, and maybe it's because it's the I don't know sincerity and enthusiasm for a relatively new technical field, but there was like almost no cynicism. Very few talks were like sloppily put together or had like kind of like brain dead, obvious, like bad, sloppy technical sort of arguments and stuff, at least that I could spot. And yeah, very good quality, at least in the sense that people seem to have really put a lot of effort, not just into like saying interesting and useful things about the technology, but also like making a genuine effort to try and like make it accessible to people who didn't know as much. So in our little group, we seem to be on a range from 1 to 4 on average. And yeah, even the most technical talks that I dropped in on, the speaker generally made an effort to do like a 1 minute LE5 type sidebar explanations on like key concepts that they thought the general audience would understand. So they're really trying. But I would say uh, about 90% of the content was like somewhere between technical to extremely technical. And by extremely technical, I mean not just by crypto sector standards, but like any kind of academic or technological thing. There was like, I don't know, really deep math talks on like number theory and cryptography that would be challenging in like even traditional academic math conferences. So it was like really deep shit. Um, what else? Oh, yeah. So I would say about 10% was maybe not 10, maybe 20% was uh, somewhat non-technical to completely non-technical talks. So I was in the completely non-technical category with like just enough reference points to the technology itself. So I think they want to do more, at least just talking to the organizers, as in they feel Ethereum ecosystem is not technically baked enough and mature enough that they can start inviting in the economists and sociologists and non-technical people to start thinking about like the softer social layers of what can evolve on top of this. So that was good too, and the people giving non-technical talks were also I think like they'd done their homework. So they'd actually tried to understand the technology as well as they could and speak to it with like, I don't know, a sincere enough effort to connect the dots. At least I tried. Some of you watched my talks. I don't know how you felt, but others too. Like for example, Bruno Macias is a well-known politics and geopolitics commentator. He's written books about it, and he did a talk, and he and I had breakfast and sort of exchanged notes. But yeah, his talk, since he was a minister in Portugal for European affairs, so he's kind of like economics policy level. He did a talk, for example, trying to connect sound money and regular monetary policy to Ethereum, and like that was an interesting talk where he basically made the argument that cryptocurrencies are the only true currencies in an economic sense. So the reason I'm pointing this out is there's both interest and emerging momentum in talking about like the beyond technical layers of what could happen in the Ethereum ecosystem. And the conversation is very small and limited at the moment, but it's solid quality, and hopefully it'll get better. Okay, so that's kind of the overall contours of the event. All right, so the things I personally went to, I got invited to the R&D workshop of the Ethereum core devs, so run by Tim Baker, who I've been doing some consulting for. He's kind of he leads what's known as the All Core Devs call. So the All Core Devs is a weekly call for all the core contributors to Ethereum, mainly from like the teams that build Ethereum clients, plus a bunch of like researchers and stuff. So he leads that call, and he was kind of like leading the conversation at the whole event. So he was leading that, and the other key figure to know is Danny Ryan. So Danny Ryan, though he refuses the description, was kind of like project managing the merge. So basically, doing like the key EIP writing, writing key tests, and then cat herding all the people doing development he's done from himself. And yeah, I had a long chat with him as well. And the two of them were leading the workshop. There were I think another dozen people who contributed key pieces, and the room had maybe 60 to 80 people. So I'm giving you these numbers to give you a sense of like what the core development process of Ethereum looks like. The bulk of the burden is carried by like I would say 15, 20 people. A few from the Ethereum Foundation, like I would say 5 or 6, including researchers and like project managers, and I would say maybe another 6 or 7 from like client teams who represent on all core devs, plus like a larger each client or like from the various clients, it has maybe 4 or 5 people at least on the core dev stuff, and then there's like I don't know 50, 60 people working on bits and pieces. Sometimes it's extremely researchy, sometimes it's pure math, sometimes it's like working on like little speculative pieces of technology that could get added into EIPs and hard forks. So I'd say the core group is like, I don't know, 80 people who form kind of like a Manhattan Project kind of team. And the merge is like their first Trinity test that went off successfully. And the whole day was discussing essentially the roadmap that we just read the little article about. And this, what we read today is like 6 months obsolete. And what I heard on, was it Monday? Yeah, Monday. What I heard on Monday was already like evolved enough from this essay that I can tell things are moving very fast. Like there's very active discussion on all this stuff, like the surge, purge, word, splurge, all elements are getting like refactored in real time. People are like moving parts around, arguing about the design. So yeah, it's not just people outside this inner ring like Ben who have like questions and concerns about the roadmap. Even within the core group, there is like significant arguments about key pieces. But yeah, the article we just read kind of covers the agenda of the R&D workshop, which is why I had you guys read it. But think of it as like very unstable and still under extreme debate. That's the state of what's going on there. Let's see, what else do I want? Okay. And then the highlights of the main event. So I think the biggest thing that surprised me was before going to the event, I thought zero knowledge proofs were these like obscure but important side technical thing that would play a key role in the roll-up infrastructure. But we're like, it's like I don't know, some obscure piece of the Linux kernel that only a few people need to know about. That was my impression. But at the event, I basically got that opinion revised. ZK proofs are kind of like philosophically the core of like the entire evolution. Everybody was talking about them. Almost every sufficiently technical talk was directly or indirectly about either ZK proofs or how to use them in weird new ways, how to design applications around the idea of ZK proofs. So it's like, and one person at least described ZK proofs to me as the biggest innovation in the space since Satoshi's original consensus algorithm itself. So that gives you a sense of like how important it is. So ZK proofs went from like minor footnotes to me to like, yeah, this is actually the core of what you should be paying attention to. And yeah, like several people here, like Nathan, I think seems to have done the deepest dive on this, and I assume Ben has as well. But I've like read a few explainers on zero knowledge. I understand some cartoon examples, but this is one of the topics that I think we should devote a couple of deep dive sessions to in the next few months. Like literally try and find like the best explainers we can and try to teach each other what the ZK proofs are. And it's kind of interesting, like because they're like such bleeding edge math that so few people confidently understand, almost a mystique has developed around them, and like throughout all the talks and dinners and things I went to, people were making jokes about how they're demonic rituals and it's a kind of magic. The core forum of like people working on this stuff calls themselves Ethereum Magicians. That's also the name of the forum where a lot of these discussions happen. What else? And for those of you who don't know, I think ZK proofs go back to the 90s. So there's like actually quite an extensive literature. But in the crypto space, as far as I know, they first made an entry with Zcash, which used it in its like zero knowledge model of the token design itself, of separate currency design. But now it's kind of like central to the roll-up idea in Ethereum and central to basically everything as far as I can see. So ZK proofs, one big highlight. Another big highlight is this is kind of like socio-technical. So one of the keynotes was by Aya Miyaguchi, who's the executive director of Ethereum, and she kind of made it explicit that the organizational sort of vision for the Ethereum Foundation is to be as small as possible and maybe even disappear. So she did a talk on subtraction in the infinite garden, which I recommend as one of the best non-technical talks, which was basically, we don't want to hire a CTO for Ethereum. We don't want to hire like a big research staff. We want to like catalyze all the necessary research and development to happen in the ecosystem itself. And that was a very interesting philosophical point of an organization that literally does not want to grow. And one of the effects of this is that a lot of the R&D momentum and energy is slowly shifting to the periphery around the core. And this is deliberate by design. And an organization all of us should pay a lot more attention to is called Xerox Spark. So it's a play on like the original Xerox Spark of the company Xerox that I used to work for. But this is spelled 0x Spark. And this is a group of young researchers, I think all in their early to late 20s at most, like so like super young, but like all kind of like mad geniuses. And they are the ones driving the core R&D on the zero knowledge proofs and all the other fundamentals forward. So they're like, if the roadmap that's explicitly defined is kind of at the development stage, as in like Vitalik and the others know roughly what the challenge is, and it's like a well-defined moonshot. What Xerox Spark is working on is sort of the next wave of things that comes right after. So they're working on much more speculative, much more research than development stuff. And it is weird shit. So if zero knowledge proofs are already stressing your technical abilities, the stuff the 0x Spark people are working on is like next level. And I went to dinner with a bunch of the key people, and they're like super smart. And I was like keeping up at like 30% level and like nodding along. But yeah, I gathered notes on like a bunch of things that are worth reading. So those are the core technical level highlights. On sort of the more sort of user experience application space side, I think blockchain-based gaming is finally starting to come into its own. Like everybody's super impressed with one game in particular, which is Dark Forest, which I think we should investigate and try to play with. So Dark Forest is inspired by the three-body problem premise of like, you know, there's a galaxy full of planets, and if you make your planet visible by sending out too many signals, invaders will come and attack you. So that's the Dark Forest sci-fi premise. And the Dark Forest blockchain game basically is a bunch of planets where you go from planet to planet invading things. And I haven't played yet, but I intend to. And there's a whole hacker basement of people playing Dark Forest and other games. And I think that the interesting thing here is the evolution since CryptoKitties in 2017 is quite significant. Like people have moved fast just replicating traditional trading games and like traditional games on the blockchain to finally understanding what the medium of the blockchain is for games. And I think this is important because I think the important application techniques that are like, you know, blockchain native will first be developed for gaming and then move on to like more like, you know, ordinary applications. So gaming is important to watch for that reason. And a lot of the UX will be developed for this. So talk to a bunch of game developer people. There's interesting things going on. Like I think the 0x Spark people, for example, are developing a low-level gaming engine called Mud. So the reference is to the traditional multi-user dungeon. But this is like does all the low-level roll-ups and off-chain stuff, handles like where necessary real-time interactions, and then people are building on top of that various kinds of interesting game mechanics. Uh, okay, I won't say much more about that. And the other big sort of application level thing to think about is what they call account abstraction. So I think the general consensus has now emerged that the way we were playing around with blockchain last year, like, directly on L1 with MetaMask, signing in, buying ENS names right on the main L1 chain, and like basically handling key pairs and other dangerous things, secret phrases, all um, like raw sense, like lowest level sense. So I think the general consensus is this won't work. Like literally, unless you're like an extreme nerd and an extremely careful extreme nerd, this is like unscalable for a Gen Pop audience. So the general consensus is we should move to account abstraction, which is kind of like a mix of you're doing things like separating signatures and validation and L1, moving as much as possible to L2. There's a few different architectures being proposed, but basically the upshot is things will start to be much safer and kind of resemble more familiar workflows. For example, you won't have to be solely responsible for a single secret phrase, and if you lose that, your entire account is lost. There's like schemes now to do, for example, social backup, where you can have okay, backing up. Right now, the main account is kind of like atomic primitive, and in future, an account or address will be actually a smart contract, and you can do things like designate somebody else as your backup person. So if you lose your secret phrase, you can like get them to reset the smart contract that's your wallet. And this is kind of like the core of account abstraction. And things will start to look much closer to like sign in with Facebook or sign in with Google, except at a decentralized level. And a lot more will be possible. So firstly, things will get more safe and secure. But yes, they will acquire more layers. So it'll become a lot more complicated. So yes, there's going to be more layers of messiness. But I think if it works out, yeah, it'll be a lot more usable and a lot more people will use it. And there is intent. So one of the big sort of keynote themes is how do you get Ethereum to the next billion people? So they literally want to get it out worldwide. So two pieces of that is making it way more usable. So it has to get as usable as M-Pesa or credit cards or things like that. And transaction fees have to really, really crash. So those are the two big things they're working towards. And so those are sort of the, I guess, core highlights of technical and non-technical themes. I think the biggest overall theme, at least in the core group, so there wasn't as much talk of it in the larger group, is ossification. So ossification is something that happened to Bitcoin as almost a matter of religion, and the general sense is that it happened in the Ethereum community. They feel that Bitcoin ossified too soon. So it's kind of like God walked into an evolutionary dead end. Whereas in Ethereum, the plan is do kind of like a very conscious and planned obsolescence. So their sense of ossification is very consciously plan what should be in the core L1 protocol, just build those core pieces, and then make the core L1 protocol extremely hard to impossible to change. That's what they refer to as ossification, and the general intent is to actually force ossification in the next 10 years. And then all these sort of actual evolution and innovation will happen at L2 and above in like around the core protocol. So ossification is something that people are talking about very consciously in the core group, and this whole roadmap of like splurge, purge, that stuff. The intent is do that in the next 5 to 10 years and get to ossification. So yeah, and at a personal level, yeah, I'm talking to EF to probably do a project on all this somewhere between the technical and social layers with them in the initially a small thing for the next few months. And then depending on how that goes, we may do a larger project. So that's where I'm personally looped in. So I'm talking to all the core people. So that's interesting conversations. I'll have more to say on that in future as that develops. So that's my trip report. Sorry, it took much longer than I thought. It's 8:45 already. So yeah, last 15 minutes, open floor. What are your general sort of speculative thoughts on the state of all this, where this is all going, and so forth? Ben, maybe you have thoughts? Yeah. Oh, whoever was speaking. Yeah. Go ahead. Ben.
Actually, I would be really curious to hear Ben's thoughts. So Ben, if you have thoughts, otherwise I few random things for nothing for
Yeah, I mean, and that was very, very useful, Venkat. Because I don't really go to conferences like that, so it's good to be able to hear from the ground what things are going on. Funny, I keep listening to you, and I keep thinking, I at some point I do want to take a real deep dive on the ZK snarks at the point where I can actually, write the code for them. But I'm busy with basic building, fortunately. So when you're trying to build like a big system, or even just like another blockchain from scratch. There's so much other little stuff that has to get done that's sort of already done in other spaces. So I don't have time to focus on just ZK Snark. Um, and it's good to hear that things are going very well in the, or at least you can tell in the Ethereum community. Um, I guess I'm not sure if I have anything like immediate response. Just uh, thinking about what I plan to do and how things might turn out. I would say I thought all the I wrote a sort of post a couple years ago that I never actually released about the positive case for cryptocurrency because I also tend to read a lot of skeptics just because I got to keep myself sharp and aware of counter arguments. And really, I think all the technical problems are solvable, and I think people are converging on the correct answers. Um, uh, Scaling through a heterogeneous distribution of data and verification is what I said. It's the very academic way of what we're calling roll up, starting, um, data availability proof. That's been the big um, change over the last I think 3 years. Is people have finally I think gotten their hands on the data availability proof. Um, because I guess from history, back like 3 or 4 years ago, 2018 or so, there was a push for it was called plasma then, and the idea was sort of what roll it eventually became roll up. So with roll ups you have to put all the data on chain. That was the sort of the critical problem with plasma, which is basically just a roll up, but you just embed the hash of the state on chain, and you run into the data availability problem. And that's been and Celestia, I think, is the other very interesting project because they're trying to use these data availability proofs correctly. Um, so okay, yeah, I think well, there's also people speaking of similar people to talk.
Yeah, Nathan, you have stuff to say?
I mean, I think the thing that was kind of bouncing around as you were talking, particularly towards the end, is that I'd like to know more about some of this account abstraction. The way you explained it makes it sound a little bit like, um, so there was some ideas, and we talked about this early on about using smart contracts like, Gnosis Safe, so I think they call themselves something different now, and things like that as kind of your account primitive rather than directly using wallets. And it sounds a little bit like an evolution of that, but I'd be curious to know more if that's um, correct. It does sound like the right approach. Like, key management is the hard thing with account security. Like, if you can have a strong key, you can have, strong proof control of that key, but managing that key is something that is very, very difficult for people to do in um, things like YubiKeys or one way. It's like, well, we'll just make this a physical token that has its own drawbacks. And I think you had mentioned something in your Twitter thread, this idea of being able to somehow securely distribute private key material. which would like that, which is kind of a little bit of a holy grail. And I wonder if like that's, I mean, is that, I just would love to know more about that. Like that seems like a really important thing. And I kind of remain, from my perspective, a little bit of research that I've done. I feel like that sort of identity layer, however that winds up looking like, that or authentication, though you could have an authorization, um, that is almost feels like or more like a canonical use case for blockchain firmware. And that would be huge in and of itself. Yeah. So that was like the key thing that as you were speaking, it's like standing out to me. It's something that seems very interesting to definitely.
Yeah, we can definitely do a session on account abstraction maybe in the next few weeks. So if you want to pick up a couple of sessions uh, from the videos once they're all posted, the talk by I think Julian Nisset is his name. He's from the first wallet, I forget its name, that supports account abstraction. Argent, yeah. So Argent is the first wallet to support native account abstraction. And he did a talk called Why Account Abstraction is a Game Changer for dApps. And later he also participated in the second thing I would recommend, which is a panel that was the end of Thursday, which included Vitalik and people from MetaMask and this guy from Argent, who talked about like just the future of account abstraction. But yeah, your basic intuition is right. You can already use contracts as wallets, which is what Gnosis Safe is, and they talked about that it's already there. What they want to do is like formalize that approach and sort of like hard bake some elements of it into L1 and sort of force all accounts into that paradigm. So I haven't fully wrapped my mind around it yet. So that's one piece. So that piece I think is a relatively uncontroversial piece for take things like Gnosis Safe, refactor, harden across L1 and L2 and sort of make it the default. The other piece, which is distributing a key across multiple, so decentralized key sharing. The LIT protocol people did a good talk, and I know the founder of that, and this is David Snyder. And I talked to some of the people building that. They're making what sound to me like revolutionary claims that the way they do effectively key sharding across multiple nodes in a very weird way. It's a paradigm that kind of breaks the beacon chain staking mechanism a little bit, and it kind of breaks the idea of soulbound tokens. But I don't know what they meant by break and how serious it is. But yeah, they claim to have basically solved decentralized, or sorry, you can already do sort of decentralized key management. They claim they can do trustless decentralized key management. So you can take a key and trustlessly shard it across like 12 nodes and sort of somehow delegate sort of a threshold-based scheme to have that decentralized trustless network validate transactions for you, and you still somehow hold signature authority. So I would recommend looking at the LIT protocol talk as well. So yeah, all this is happening, but yeah, Nathan, I think your intuitive reading of what the state of play is about right. But let's plan on like doing a session. I'll pick a couple of useful reads on this stuff or something. The problem is so much of the material here is videos, and videos I think don't suit our discussion format well. But I'll try to find readings, and I'll also post videos for people to watch offline away from this meeting. So yeah, account abstraction is on the agenda for some time in the next few weeks.
Thanks for the report, Venkat. Really, really interesting. I'm curious if the like what kind of discussion was happening around the purge, and the kind of history expiry element of that. If you like, if that came up in conversation, I'm curious like what kind of conversations are happening there. If there's any talks that happened about that that are interesting to think about, and what kind of implications that has on like our understanding of time in the context of blockchains.
Yeah, so that's I think probably the least defined element of the roadmap as it currently stands. But yes, people are thinking actively about it. And for example, the early experiment in dank sharding, which is like blob payloads, that gets at that a little bit. So the idea is you would have these nodes that would that would store archive. Okay, I may be misunderstanding, so if anybody knows better, please correct me. But you would have transactions that have data payloads that would live on L1 for like a fixed period, like 1 month or something. But once that's done, you could sort of like offload them. So they've already been sort of gone through consensus and are kind of like stable. You don't expect it to change. So you kind of basically offload it and archive it offline. So it literally is like a scheme where it's not so much forgetting everything as you don't take responsibility for remembering it in the L1 or even lower L2 levels, but you don't actually actively try to stop people from remembering, which means you can have all these sort of internet archive or like Wayback Machine type schemes where you've got like the front end of active processing and validation and signing and all that stuff that's like processing live data, but as the data settles, it basically diffuses off the blockchain, and depending on how valuable it is to people, they can just store it. So in theory, you don't have to forget. If it's valuable to remember, you'll remember, but in sort of a Wayback Machine type paradigm rather than sort of on-chain. But I think that this is not a settled topic. I suspect there's going to be like layers of this. So there may be like extremely core data that will, of course, stay on L1. There will be stuff that L2 choose to remember. There will be stuff that lives on like IPFS and things like that. And then there will be, I don't know, like rings and rings of like memory of like decreasing reliability but increasing capacity. That's the way I would put it. So it's like graceful degradation of memory as you go outward from the L1 core. So that's, I think, how people are thinking, but I think this is late in the roadmap. So handling this will come once you've done like the other pieces and actually are producing the huge torrents of data that are like basically impossible to even think of keeping on chain. Like already running a full archival node is like beyond the capacity of like almost everybody. But this is like by design, it won't be 100% memory at the core. So yeah, that's kind of like the state of play, I would say. But yes, it's an active conversation. People are talking. The Xerox Spark people are doing like some active research on like effectively like, I don't know, time-based locking mechanisms and shit. I think it was Xerox Spark people I was talking to about that. But yeah, active area. Other people are thinking about this question in what seem like reasonable and sound ways.
I know we need to stop, but I wanted to chime in, Venkat, that on Monday it was Ben and Meredith and I, Ben's still here, but we penciled in, that idea that pops up to me a lot. Some people seem interested of having people guests come in and talk about their stuff, and we took it as a moment to test out the forum part of the software. So if you guys go look at Discord that they added, we just popped in initial posts of things that would be interesting. So if you like that idea, if you don't like it, it's fine. But, you've got a lot. You've already planned for a lot that we could talk about this fall. But if you like that idea, maybe you can dovetail the groups that the readings that we would just do ourselves, and then readings where maybe we could bring in somebody to talk about their thing. And I like the idea of treating it as informal office hours for them, as opposed to the DevCon, that big public announcement. So happy to help or
yeah, definitely. Let's experiment with the forum mechanism. I saw the thing pop up, but I haven't yet explored it or like gotten familiar with the UX. And as far as like getting guests lead discussion on key topics, definitely. If we can find people who kind of like both understand the topic at like 7 or 8 level and are willing to like help us elify it and understand it, yeah, we should actively look for those people and bring them in. And I think one of the things that might help, I was thinking about this, is actually like publishing an agenda, like, for the next 4 months. Let's just make up a tentative agenda of like, we want to discuss account abstraction this date, we want to discuss, I don't know, gaming on this date and so forth. And publish that agenda and advertise it and basically solicit people who might want to come and talk and join. So it could be that on some topics we get like more than one person and we kind of just shut up and let them almost do a panel discussion with us as the audience. So I think there's a few ways to do this. So yeah, definitely let's talk more.
I think the one point last year you called it we could be the honest broker.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of people trying to play that role since I think it's a high value role, and some of them are like not exactly good faith. They're trying to capture the Ethereum core development role. So this was, by the way, a big concern with all the Coinbase and other like private entities coming in. Like there was I heard some concern that Coinbase people were present in the core development R&D workshop, and there was a little bit of concern there that because they're trying really, really hard to keep the core process both open source and neutral, but also a very small core where the EF people are like the minimal, and it's like mainly center of gravity is around. This is a process that's going to be very hard to like stop people trying to capture it. Like any private entity, VC firms, big companies, Microsoft, I don't know. Lots of people have an incentive to try and capture the core Ethereum dev process. So the honest broker role is a little bit viewed with like, all right, you have to like actually earn the right to be called an honest broker. So just flagging that even at a social level. So if you claim you're becoming the forum for like honest conversations about this stuff, you're gonna have to prove it. The proof of neutrality or something.
And being captured would be what should happen because that's what happens. And I'm sure you've thoughts about this. How are they well placed to avoid being captured? Do you have a sense of the core team that actually gets this pretty well?
I think they are, and a big part of it, I think, is Vitalik actually setting extremely good precedents there, and is like kind of aware of how these things might play out, and is I don't know, almost setting things up to resist that. And the core devs like genuinely seem to believe in that value of like we should not let this get captured, and if it gets captured, it dies. Like it doesn't get anywhere close to like achieving things like Ethereum for the next billion at low transaction cost kind of like vision. So yes, they're very aware, and as good as a group, I suspect could be in planning to resist capture. But then again, I don't know, forces that want to capture these things are not exactly amateurs, right? Everything from central banks to big governments with guns and big money hedge funds and VCs. And attempts have already happened there. So yeah, resisting capture at any level is non-trivial. But I mean, these guys are as well prepared as they can be. And yeah, we can try to be part of that.
Fascinating case study. PhDs are going to be written about this for the next 100 years.
We'll see. We're a couple of minutes over, so let's stop here and we can continue discussing in the forum and the thread or the channel. And I'll start penciling in. I guess every alternate week on blockchain topics might be interesting again for a while. But I think we should still continue general distributed systems focus and like do topics outside of blockchain for 50% of the bandwidth. At least that's my sense. We can discuss that more. All right, see you guys next week.